Okay. So this is, I'm changing topics. I'm not returning to it actually, to using ultrasound and other methods and optics for aiding hyperthermia. With X-rays and with chemotherapy, you're treating most of the cancer suffering nowadays. But you can lower the dose of chemo or of radiation to factor 2 or 3 if you keep the temperature of the tumor within some limit. Some tumors might be 42 degrees centigrade to 44 degrees centigrade. So if you can keep all of the tumor in that range, then you'll make the radiation much more effective on the cancer. So you can use less of it, have less effect on the normal tissues, maybe even be able to repeat it if it doesn't succeed that time. We've also worked with using ionizing radiation acoustic imaging, where you image the ultrasound waves that are produced by the thermal expansion of the tissue from the energy deposited by the X-ray beam. That's a minuscule amount of energy because most of the damage is done by breaking the DNA with the ionizing radiation. But there's still enough energy that you can produce a small amount of ultrasound. And if you have an array with preamps on every channel and 50 dB gain on those preamps, and if the transducer is at the frequency of the ultrasound that's being produced, you can actually image the X-ray beam. So with a linear accelerator, typical in radiation therapy is 4 microsecond pulse. That produces about 360 kilohertz ultrasound from the main pulse. If you just want to look at the edges of the pulse, which you can do with the X-rays because it turns on and off pretty fast, and then 4 megahertz is pretty good. But that's not nearly as much signal as taking the main signal from the main pulse. So we use a Virasonics ultrasound system like you just got in your labs here, and various types of ultrasound probes looking at the body. These are pretty early slides. It showed a rabbit getting irradiated from the side, straight in. I'm sorry, I'm pointing at the wrong thing here. So X-ray beam coming straight in, and you see the front and back side of the X-ray beam with an ultrasound transducer over here. Or you see this side of the X-ray beam and that side of the X-ray beam. You don't see these sides because it's sending out a plane wave, but not in the direction of the transducer, so you don't really see it. Now, if your ultrasound frequency were such that this distance were half a wavelength, you could see the hole that would fill in with the signal. But your ultrasound frequency is pretty high. This, I think, was a average of 2.5 megahertz array. So a wavelength is about probably that kind of distance. And so you're only seeing the edges. But if you know about what the shape of the beam is, you can fill in and get quantitative with what the radiation dose was, as well as whether it was in the right place in the first place. This is a safety check, another check that you're delivering the dose to the right place in the body. As you get up to fast doses in X-ray therapy, there's a new type of therapy called fast radiation therapy, which use about 100 times, at least 100 times the dose rate of normal radiation therapy. And with that, you get some bioeffects advantages, supporting the normal tissue over the tumor tissue Um, and so you'd like to do that, except you're going to deliver all your dose to one spot in 1 or 2 or 3 pulses. So then you really want to do together, right? And this technique is going to be really valuable. And this is one of the few ways of actually measuring doses at those high dose rates. So it's a pretty nice technique. They work with Cherenkov radiation also, and a few other techniques for, but this one is one of the leading ones, if not the leading one for actually getting people at those high dose rates. I'm just going to skip to the, I've already talked about the flash, and we're getting like, at least in a fan, we got like 1% bias in the measured dose in ideal geometry. This shows using some conventional linear arrays, phased arrays on the fan, and you show that measuring the dose as a function of depth in the fan fit really well. Dose per pulse. We went ahead and designed a system that was designed for the radiation therapy units. So this is a 1024 element array, about 0.8 lambda on the side. The elements are about 0.8 lambda on the side at 360 kilohertz. Turns out that's about 8 by 8 centimeters surface area. The whole thing with the preamps and everything weighs 35 pounds, and it's pretty big, so it gets in the way of a lot of your radiation therapy beams that you'd like to use. And you don't want to treat the transducer with the radiation therapy beam because the transducer can't handle that. You eventually damage the transducer elements. So we got this big array, and we're able to do some patients. This was this is a treatment planning plan where you they run radiation all the way around and trying to treat this pancreas around the spine, trying to minimize the dose to the spine and get the whole pancreas, or maybe that's part of the liver. Anyway, these are the actual measured results. That's simulated, that's measured. These are measured in at different times as the treatment goes on, and at the end is after the full treatment. And you see that the measured dose distribution pretty well fits the simulated treatment. Phantom setup, and I think this was for a rabbit that's showing the planned radiation distribution as a function of dose. Planned amount was in red, and the IRI, the image dose is pretty close to that. And it shows the transducer over here pushed up against the patient. We use a balloon to couple the ultrasound to the patient. We keep trying to get them to design to use a better balloon that's more self-supporting. But it shows that we got pretty good dose distributions on that patient compared with the plan. Hyperthermia, I started out talking about that. Hyperthermia has not really worked out very well clinically, and a lot of people have lost interest in it. It's used in a few cases where they treated the patient as much as they could with certain kinds of breast cancers, soft tissue sarcomas. They once you've treated it, you can't treat it again, basically. If you did do HIFU, you can go back and retreat it. I mean, if you do if you do hyperthermia, you can go back and treat it again because you're using about half the dose. And you can still perhaps cure it. And if you'd done it in the first place, you'd be much better off. So we started working with doing some of that with the 2D array transducer like our big one. And the thermoacoustic effect, when you heat the tissue, it expands and produces a pressure. That effect is reduced. It's very different from fat. And so you can, but you can still measure the temperature rise if you know what tissue it is. And from MR and CT, and perhaps ultrasound, you can have what kind of tissue it is. So this imaging, radiation acoustic imaging, ionizing radiation acoustic imaging is led by SIIM, who is your professor here this morning. And he was at the University of Michigan, and now he's at Moffitt Cancer Center. But still, he keeps his grant, and we've got a subcontract on that grant for doing a lot of the acoustics of it and the thermoacoustics. Thermoacoustics meaning temperature rise produces ultrasound. So I've been working on hyperthermia with two groups, one at Wayne State University, who has who developed one of the breast cancer scanners, the Delphinus breast cancer scanner, and also with a group in Nanjing University, an image processor, signal processor, G1. So G's student, Yuchun Wang, did these simulations. We're using a ring array, assuming I think it was a 9 millimeter high ring array, and a tumor. The nearest distance from the ring array to the tumor is, the distance from any one element is L sub I, and the greatest distance from the ring array to one of the elements is L sub 0 for reference. It's a 100 millimeter ring array. This would be for doing arms on some people. And this was the simulation, or this was the assumed properties of the phantom: cortical bone, blood vessel, tumor, muscle, fat, skin. And this is this is a real phantom, and this is the actual measured result. No, it's all simulation. This is simulation with the ring array that I described. And you see that you're getting pretty good images of that using speed of sound imaging as a transmission tomography. You're not getting the cortical bone showing high speed of sound because there's so much artifact from the refraction at the boundaries, but at least you're getting the boundaries. And if you know it's bone, you can correct the ultrasound. I guess since we're running down tight on time, I'm not going to go through all this. But you're just computing the difference in transit time between the tumor and the the difference in time between the time it takes to go from here to here and from there to there is given by just the speed of sound and the distances. And with the heat conduction equation, you can model the diffusion of temperature for creating heat. If you want to do ultrasound to create the hypothermia with the ring array, as well as image it, you can do that. If you can find a way to generate ultrasound in the pattern that you want and keep it there, then you can actually do hypothermia. And we think that the reason hypothermia hasn't caught on is because you've never been able to image it without sticking a lot of thermocouples in, and then you still didn't get enough thermocouples in. And I go through all that. There is MR-guided hypothermia now, but if you're having to do this during the treatment or immediately before or after each treatment, so you do a 5-course treatment, so you tie up an MR machine for an hour and a half, 5 times for one patient, that's very expensive. Anyway, you can model that, and that's what was done in this paper that I've referenced here. This shows what we were modeling before. It's the same slide basically, and you're using the K-wave simulation tool for the ultrasound simulations. I mentioned that we can use this K-wave and other full wave migration imaging to do these reconstructions using these are the properties that you have to assume for that particular family. And this was showing that you could raise the temperature up with this ring array using reasonable acoustic outputs up to the desired temperature and keep it within plus or minus a half degree, a quarter degree over time. It did take some time to actually get it heated up using that array with those limitations. So having an array that's got bigger elements and focused, it's easy to get a factor of 10 gain on just by making the array bigger in the elevational direction and making it bigger in diameter and further out and higher so that you can focus and get a focal gain. That's another, that's assuming different blood flows in the tumor. I guess we don't have that here. But this is just assuming different blood flows in the blood vessels and the temperature at those different levels. I think that's the temperature in the tumor, showing you can still control it for different conditions. That they didn't do that well in getting the temperature as high as they wanted throughout that tumor, but I think that's just a failure to work on the convergence to make it uniform throughout that black circle. So working with the group at Wayne State, who's now at Rochester, University of Rochester, we designed in a grant proposal that didn't get funded, using a ring array ultrasound transducer to illuminate the breast, to image it, and made a phantom that had actual blood flow in it, and simulated glandular pattern in the breast. And that's at 2 different frequencies. At 300 kilohertz, you don't have as good a resolution. And here we were trying to treat a tumor in the center of this. I guess that's breast with glandular tissue stripes in it. And showing pretty uniform tissue around. Spike there, again, not getting as flat a response as we'd like in the tumor. But I think that still should be adjustable. And to do that, and we used the prototype for the Delphinus ultrasound breast scanner, ring array, and ran water in it to keep the water temperature constant. And we looked at, can we image bone? Can we image a phantom of bone in it? We started out with just water and bone, and water temperature control. That's a leg of lamb. And with here we have a phantom with the gelatin. And here was lamb and meat phantom with fluid flowing through it for simulating blood flow. And see that as we increase the temperature of the water flowing through the tubes, that was what we thought was flowing through the tubes. And this is what was measured acoustically in some of these different tubes with the bone in the way. You see the bone on the tubes. Yeah. I guess we didn't measure that. Anyway. Earlier, we did some work with microwave hyperthermia and ultrasound combined. This was done with Mata Mogadon in the electrical engineering department at the University of Michigan. And one of my postdocs and one of her graduate students. She has since moved to USC in California. But here's the ultrasound ring array, and here is the microwave array. To be compatible with the ultrasound array, with one row of these antenna elements. And here's what the breast tank would look like, where the woman would lie down, put the breast in here. And there's a membrane here that makes it fairly comfortable to lie down. And this is showed the experimental array that was developed for a lot of our experimental work. It had 3 rows of antennas in it. And you see the microwave cables coming into each one of those antenna elements. Getting the power for all that is not inexpensive. John Stang was the postdoc. Wanted to just mention a little bit more on photoacoustic tomography, where you're using light. You send a pulse of light in, it heats the tissue. You can heat dark tissues more than other tissues. You can heat oxygenated blood with one frequency of light better than you can with another, and deoxygenated better than with other frequencies. So if you do at least two frequencies of light, you can theoretically distinguish oxygenated from deoxygenated, preferably for 2 frequencies. But even then, it's a little bit hard because most people don't correct for the fact that you've got an homogeneous light field. and it's different in homogeneity for the different frequencies. So that needs to be done carefully, and the claims need to be, one needs to look and see whether they're being honest about the claims. When Shiding Wang came to my group at the University of Michigan around 2020, he came with, as one of the, he was the best postdoc really with Li Han Wang, who was one of the greats of photoacoustic tomography. And Shiding has gone on to a very bright career. So when he started working on photoacoustic tomography, John Ribbon, radiologist in ultrasound, said, go for the easy task first. And so he said, do arthritis, do the joints, because they're pretty superficial. And so a lot has happened there. I don't know how far away it is from common clinical use, but it should be getting pretty close. And you can see the grayscale ultrasound of this finger joint. Here's one of the ones coming out, knuckle, and the other one in the knuckle. Carter is probably in here. And photoacoustics, you're seeing the same structures. Let's see, was this was just grayscale ultrasound? Okay. Not using grayscale ultrasound, grayscale and photoacoustics. The photoacoustics, you see the blood vessels lining up with the dark blood, and you can combine the two. Thought I had it in here, a Doppler one. Yeah. Well, this is what Doppler showed with that. I think this is probably just a standard old GE Logic 7 ultrasound system. So we concluded that with the photoacoustics you could do very well without the Doppler ultrasound. I think that's still a big issue to be decided when you might want to use ultrasound for blood flow and when you might want to use photoacoustics. Although the ultrasound doesn't tell you the oxygenation without contrast. At University of Buffalo, State University of New York, this Frontiers in Oncology, this is their mammoth. They designed for a seated patient, imaging the breast with ultrasound or photoacoustics. Compressing the breast is like basically in the mammographic geometry. And they are getting very nice photoacoustic imaging of the blood vessels in the breast with higher intensities. I think the color up there is showing the strength of the signal or the depth of the signal. Anyway, you do have more signal up close than you do on the deeper vessels, but that's still an awfully good vessel pattern. And these people at Buffalo are moving ahead with a lot of things, and we're hoping to work with them further. I'm going to move to one other slide set, just a few slides, just some other topics. Okay. I just thought this was an interesting paper. It's just a good review on different ways of imaging, doing nano particle imaging in the body. One is phase transition nanodroplets that we've worked on since for about 30 years. Well, microdroplets we work with mostly. Nanodroplets are nice because they can get out of the bloodstream and next to the cells of interest to be attached to the cells, get out in the tumor, through the leaky vessels of the tumor. So you can do acoustic droplet vaporization of those microbubbles. Takes pretty high amplitude of ultrasound. The smaller the micro or nanobubble, the harder it is to vaporize, depending on the vapor pressure of the particular fluorocarbon. You can also vaporize them with lasers, optical droplet vaporization, or you can do magnetic droplet vaporization, which people are experts on here. This was an interesting article on molecular thermometers. This is working down around the 3 to 10 Kelvin range, 3 to 20 Kelvin range. But they're using nanocrystals that are thermal sensors. So you excite the crystal up into an excited state, and with mechanical by pushing or with another optical wavelength, you cause it to cascade down and release its energy, and the width of this P of this particular nanocrystal is temperature dependent. So if you could make such a crystal that you could use up at higher temperatures, might be good for hypothermia. This was PhD work at the University of Michigan. It was at a symposium just a couple of weeks ago. Ralph Koppelman developed pedicles and in the chemistry department. And for 20 or 30 years, he was developing pedicles as a way of studying all sorts of things in the body. He had pH sensitive devices and temperature sensitive, and could measure all sorts of properties in the body down at the single cell level, and including pressure sensitive or vibration sensitive sensors. So you can actually measure elasticity. So Dr. Koppelman, look him up. There are hundreds of papers on this topic, and there are a lot of people around the world that worked with him who are doing that work. So that's a great resource. At that symposium, a lot of the people came back who were doing different work. A lot of those papers are together. I took a number of the photos of a number of the slides, but those are probably available. This was one that caught my attention in April of 23, Nature Nanotech, Cardoni, Cantor, the code in Paris. And that's using mechanosensitive things that go into the genes of the brain. And it lets you image neuronal activity or create neuronal activity with acoustic pressure on those mechanosensitive genes. This was using this is T model. I think it's T model instead of TD model. But it turns out that visual cortex, this is the mouse visual cortex, the back of the brain, and they have suboccipital lobe. But it is cortex, so it's near the surface. So you go through the skull, or better yet, you take the skull flap out and put an ultrasound transducer in there, and you can image or create images that the person sees. If you can create an excitation area that's small enough, and if you can create them fast enough in enough locations at the same time to make an image. What's that require? It requires being able to make a complex pattern at high resolution. It's about 13 frames per second. That can be done with ultrasound. You can send out multiple beams simultaneously at like 1 kilohertz rep rate and make a pattern. And they were finding that around 15 megahertz, they got the best results. And they had about a 270, 280 micron resolution, which is enough to make an imaging pattern which showed up. That they put some sort of screen in the brain in there to show that they were exciting the neurons in that visual pattern. Anyway, that to me is exciting. It's not just for restoring sight, people that are blind and hearing, people that are loss of hearing, perhaps taste. Might be kind of tough with the transducer under your tongue, but people have rings in their noses, so if I were getting in, I would be pretty excited about working the brain myself. If I were getting in the field nowadays. So I think that's my slides. I appreciate you all showing up at this thing here at this late hour.
I have one question. You showed that images of the radiation therapy in vivo in humans.
Yes.
Is that big thing? It's
35 pounds.
Wow. And how many elements is that?
1024.
1024.
Got
it's low frequency.
Got 200. Yeah, it's low frequency. So you couldn't make it much smaller at that frequency. It would be that many elements.
Because of the pitch.
What's that?
Because of the distance from the elements.
They're pretty close together. The curve is very small, but the elements are 0.8 lambda. So it's kind of a tough thing. What do you do for regular X-ray beams? I think for fast imaging, I hope to be able to go to a higher frequency, 3 or 4 megahertz.
But then you lower the resolution a lot because the length of the radiation pulse is like a few microseconds, right? The duration of the pulse.
Yes. The proton accelerators that we're working with at Harvard, they're working to get it down to 10 microseconds. So my hope is that we can get them to have a sharp enough edge on those pulses that we can image it with the 4 megahertz, have a wide field of view but a fairly small transducer, and for the fast imaging with the proton therapy to be able to get good sensitivity.
Do you think this has good future? Do you see this as a?
I think it's kind of neat. It's not as important as being able to do high resolution diagnosis, I think. You know, you're going to do a lot more cases, a lot more money involved, I think, with diagnosis. But getting something into clinical use is a lot easier in therapy than it is in diagnosis, particularly screening diagnosis. Because screening, you're doing a lot of patients that are not that sick, and so you can't afford to do harm to a large fraction of them. You know, one damaged patient out of 100,000 would not be very acceptable for a breast imaging technique. Whereas with radiation therapy, these are people that are very sick. If you can improve their chances, you do it. And so it's a lot easier to get governmental approval for the therapeutic procedures.
I can try to say in English, but I can translate.
I should give you the microphone.
Oh my God, okay. The nanoparticle that you showed in the slide, they can serve to dosimetric radiation too, or just for sensor therapy?
Can you repeat that?
Chamam partículas que mostrou, elas podem ser servidas para medir a dose de radiação também da temperatura.
Saying that you showed some particles that can be used to measure temperature during the hypothermia.
Oh, yeah.
If there could be a way of measure radiation with the particles, maybe using ultrasound together.
Yeah, or just directly. Solid state electronics doesn't behave very well under radiation. You know, some of the gallium arsenide transistors are more radiation resistant. The military has some more radiation resistant. But, so you might be able to make some dosimeters that work. But most solid state and other ionization chambers don't work at fast doses. The dose is too high for the ionization chamber. So I think I had seen something on some electronic chamber for high dose rates. Whether you would need the ultrasound or the optics to read it out, might need it. That would be helpful.
Okay, so let's take again Professor Paul.